Welcome to Sanibel-Captiva's original podcast, The Insider's Guide to the Islands. My name is Nick Adams from Nick Adams Photography. I will be chatting with island experts from fishing guides to shellers to local personalities. I aim to get the insider information to make your island experience incredible. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Kristie, the Education Director at the Sanibel-Captiva Conservation Foundation, or SCCF as everybody knows it. Explain in a nutshell what the SCCF is all about and what it does and what its purpose is.
Well, SCCF is sort of a strange mix. It's not a land trust, although one of its primary focuses is preserving conservation lands. Also has a marine research laboratory, and we conduct wildlife studies on sea turtles and shorebirds and on indigo snakes and other threatened and imperiled species. And then we provide educational programs, and we have a native landscape and garden center. So it comes across a broad spectrum of things. Our mission is to preserve wildlife habitat and coastal resources.
Okay, and they're actual landowners themselves?
We are. We're the single largest private landholder on the islands.
Okay.
With almost 2,000 acres.
Wow, that's incredible. And then where is the actual head office of the SCCF?
In some ways we're what you might call decentralized. Our habitat management people are located on the Sanibel-Captiva Road. Our main nature center is at 3333 Sanibel-Captiva Road. Our native landscape and garden center, which is another focus for visitors, is on Periwinkle Way near the intersection of Donax. And then our new marine research laboratory is being built at on the Ding Darling Wildlife Refuge at Tarpon Bay.
Oh, wow. I think we saw that. We had Wendy here from Tarpon Bay Explorers, and we actually drove down there and we saw the big building on the right-hand side. It's pretty impressive.
We're very excited to have our research higher than 2 feet above sea level.
Yeah, there you go. And what sort of research will they be doing there?
Well, they've been doing it since the beginning of this millennium. They do monitoring of water quality, so we have remote sensors up the river and up Pine Island Sound and out off the lighthouse that broadcast 24 hours a day to our data bank about dissolved oxygen and the quality of the water, what kind of nutrient loading there is, and whether sunlight can get to the seagrasses and those sorts of things. And we do restoration of mangroves and oyster beds and do studies on the seagrasses and a multitude of things, and also work offshore. Because sometimes Sanibel gets a pileup of algae on the beaches, and everyone calls it red drift algae, and it's actually about 8 species, and they grow on rocks offshore. But when there's a lot of nutrients, those things grow fast, they break off, and then they drift.
Okay. They break off naturally or because of storms?
Normally because of storms or high winds, but when they have an accelerated growth, there's more resistance in the water, so less disturbance because of larger growth. They'll come off. It doesn't need to be a hurricane or a tropical storm for that to happen.
So the data that you're collecting, what is that? Is that being purposed, or is that just data collection for now? Or
oh no, we use it. It's broadcast to every scientist in the world. Anyone can tap into our database, and that database for those remote sensors go back to 2008. We ourselves use that information to make decisions about what SCCF should position itself for in the way of goals on water quality, discharges from Lake Okeechobee and the Caloosahatchee, and had the data available for helping move forward the nutrient regulations that Sanibel came up with when it came to fertilizing your lawns and those sorts of things. Our scientists also monitor the freshwater lens that lies beneath the sand but above the salt water on Sanibel, and can guide the city in their management of those freshwater wetland systems. So it's applied data. One of the important things for scientists is not to become biased. And so the data, the numbers are solid, and we can use those numbers to say, here's what the flow of the river is, here's what you promised the flow to the river to be, and here's what we recommend you should do to rectify it.
Wow.
And that goes out to anywhere from 80 to 100 decision makers and policy people, politicians, and others, so that everyone becomes aware of what's going wrong.
Fantastic. And why was it actually started? Was it...
The Marine Research Laboratory?
Well, the SCCF as a whole.
So SCCF is 51 years old this year. And when Jay Darling, who was a leader of conservation here on the islands, passed away in 1962, a small group of residents formed the Ding Darling Memorial Committee. And because he had such a large presence nationally, there was also a National Ding Darling Foundation. So it gets a little confusing when you say Ding Darling something. There's the Ding Darling Memorial Committee that was local, the Ding Darling Foundation, which was national. Together, they spent 5 years formulating what would become the Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. Ding Darling Foundation's based out of Des Moines, Iowa. They went on to do other things, and the little local group said, but there's more to preserving this island than just preserving the mangroves. And so the same year the refuge was dedicated in honor of Jay Darling, that little group of people reorganized themselves, incorporated as a 501c3, and became the Sanibel-Captiva Conservation Foundation. So we morphed out of this memorial to Jay Darling.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there a mission statement? I mean, you've
absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is a single mission statement through which we run everything to make our decisions about how we're going to spend our resources, and that is to preserve wildlife habitat and coastal resources on and around Sanibel-Captiva and the surrounding watershed, period. So if we know that it will help wildlife habitat, if we know it'll help the coastal resources, we'll do it. If we have sufficient funding for that. And that comes simply from donations.
It's 100% funded by donations?
We do have some... I should be careful about that. We do have some grants, but most of those are used to acquire stuff. It's not to staff the stuff.
For equipment stuff, or you mean for land?
No, for land, but also for equipment.
Okay.
Usually they're interested in acquiring the equipment for you to do the work, but the real expense is in sustaining the employees who are actually doing the work in the public and out in the field. So we have 2 PhDs who are working at the Marine Laboratory, and many of our staff have master's degree in wildlife management.
Wow. So how many staff is there?
There are 20 of us.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. So we've been to the we've been to both places that you can get to, but we were just down at the one on Periwinkle there, and you've moved the part of what they do is trying to introduce local species of plants back into the local areas to help what? Just to stop invasive species taking over, or that too had an interesting genesis. The Native Landscape and Garden Center came about in 1977, right on the heels of the incorporation of the city of Sanibel, because the city of Sanibel's incorporation required that 3/4 of your open land be landscaped in native plants. People said, that's a great idea, but where do I get native plants? And we said, we know where you can get them. And the
Native Landscape and Garden Center was founded.
Wow, okay. And now that's recently in the last, since 2000?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So it's moved down to the start of Periwinkle. As you come onto the island, it's on. You turn right onto Periwinkle Road. It's on the right-hand side as you go up there.
Right.
And it's on the old Bailey tract of land.
It's not the Bailey Tract. The Bailey Tract is part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on Tarpon Bay.
Okay.
It is part of the original Bailey Homestead.
Bailey Homestead. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So you can actually go there and buy plants. And
Yeah,
it's like
the-
a nursery, but dedicated to local species. And
Right. We've made the Native Landscape and Garden Center publicly accessible, not only for people who are interested in buying native plants, but also as an education center unto itself. And so it has a public use element to it. There are hammocks hanging out in the yard, and there's a hiking and biking trail on there. And she's planted demonstration gardens that show you what kind of plants grow where on the island. And then if you choose to purchase native plants, they're available for sale.
yeah, and it's definitely worth a look. There's picnic tables. There's hammocks, like you said. There's a big. No, there's not.
No picnic
That's
tables.
Part of, oh, is that on the bike path further down?
Well, adjacent to the Bailey Homestead Preserve is the city park. It's called Roadside Park, and it has picnic tables
Okay,
at
so
it.
I've walked through there into
Correct.
probably. Okay, all right, I stand corrected. Okay, yeah, no picnic tables. There is hammocks though.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are.
All right, so just backtracking a little bit. Just tell me how you found your way to Sanibel and the surrounding areas.
Oh, myself?
Yeah.
All right. So I taught marine science in the Florida Keys and eventually started working for the National Park Service. So I was a ranger in Everglades National Park, Acadia National Park, and found myself with what my parents might call the real job with the Park Service, with insurance and all those wonderful things. In order to do that, you had to kind of put in your time at an urban park, which after living in wilderness was a tough thing to do. But that was Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and I saw a job listing for the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge for an outdoor recreation planner, and applied for that job. And apparently I was the only one that applied that knew what a mangrove was, because most people who work for the Fish and Wildlife Service are used to prairies or marshlands and those sorts of things. So I got the job with the refuge and worked there 5 years, and then for the last 30 years I've worked at SCCF.
And quite a large portion of those years you've been commuting by boat, is that right?
For 22 years, I commuted by boat from the north end of North Captiva near Cayo Costa to Captiva, where I got in my car and drove to work, yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
So
it's quite an adventure.
If you haven't been to the island before, the island north of Captiva, there's North Cap, which is a separate island that's only accessible by boat. And there's how many houses on there, would you say?
There's 300 houses at the north end, about a dozen at the south end. The 300 homes at the north end are wired. They have electricity. The south banks do not.
Is the north and south connected again now? I know Hurricane Charlie, it was torn
Right.
into two, wasn't it? Is it back together? Or?
Oh, sure.
It is, yeah.
It opens and closes frequently. Hurricane Charlie in 2004, it was open for about 2 years, but
Gotcha.
it closed back up.
So you still live there? Or?
I do not.
Okay.
My back said no. to
No more pounding on
no
boats
more
every
30
day.
knot winds and cold fronts. No.
Well, yeah, that's totally understandable. And you told me a little story about this picture here is actually...
That's right.
Yeah, so tell me what you were telling.
This is an ice house from the 1920s, and it's located at the north end of North Captiva Island at the mouth of Safety Harbor. And so it's kind of become iconic for North Captiva. Now, this ice house was built by the Punta Gorda Fish and Ice Company, and these structures were out where the water was deep enough for commercial fishermen to come in and unload their catch. The fish were iced down, and then a run boat would come down from Punta Gorda every other day, take the fish back up, put it on a train, and take it north. And they operated until the 1950s, and then the individual occupants of these fish houses were given an opportunity to purchase the house, and if they had their bill of sale, later on they prevailed in a lawsuit that allowed them to remain in place. There was a movement by the state to remove fish houses from all over Florida, and the gentleman that owned this particular fish house discovered the National Historic Register, or National Register of Historic Places. And so he applied to have that fish house put on that National Register and succeeded in doing that. And because that's a federal program, they usurped the state, and that fish house is allowed to be rebuilt if a hurricane destroys it.
Yeah.
And it did. Hurricane Charlie peeled that roof right off of that.
Yeah, it's had new pilings as well, hasn't it?
A couple new pilings. It gets pretty jiggly when someone goes by fast. I've spent many a night out there.
You slept out there?
Oh yes,
really?
Oh yes.
And it's totally iconic. If you go into North Cap, you actually have to go past it. The channel comes back around this way,
right.
And it's been used for photo shoots with Sports Illustrated and different things like that. So. Yeah, very interesting. That's cool. Mm-hmm. And do you miss the North Cap life, or Upper Cap, as some people call it?
I miss the sky and I miss the water on a daily basis. About 1 out of 10 days I would have traded in for anything.
Yeah.
But the rest of the time, just having that open space. And if you're going home after 5 o'clock at night when all the marinas are closed, you had about 10 square miles of water to yourself, which
Beautiful
was kind of wonderful.
Fantastic. And then can you tell me a little bit about your work with the sea turtles?
Well, when I started at the Janding Darling National Wildlife Refuge, there was a gentleman whose name was Charles LeBoeuf, who worked there as a biologist. And Charles LeBoeuf began researching loggerhead sea turtles back in the late 1950s. So he's one of the first sea turtle researchers in the state of Florida. In fact, he has sea turtle permit number 1.
Really? Okay.
And his day job was a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and his night avocation was working on sea turtles. And so Charles began to ask me to come out with him on sea turtle patrols in 1984.
Wow.
And then when Charles retired, he decided that he wanted to entrust the continuation of that sea turtle program to an organization he felt would carry through with his original intent. And so he handed over the Sea Turtle Project to SCCF in 1992.
And explain a little bit about, for those that don't know.
Okay, because sea turtles are endangered and threatened species, you're required to have permits to work with them. But if you consider that the data goes back to 1958 with Charles, we go out now at just before sunrise and begin to cover every stretch of beach from the lighthouse of Sanibel to Redfish Pass. And we use over 100 volunteers to do that. And when we see what looks like giant bulldozer tracks in the sand, that's generally a sign that a sea turtle has emerged from the Gulf and is crawling up onto the beach. And that usually happens from late April until the end of August. And once she climbs up onto the beach, she may decide that the conditions aren't quite right and she'll turn around and go back. Other times she feels conditions are right, she'll actually excavate a nest with her hind flippers and build a hole that's about as big around as a 2-pound coffee can and about 30 inches deep. And she'll drop anywhere from 60 to 120 eggs that look like ping pong balls. And then she'll cover that back up. She'll go back to the Gulf. She'll never see the babies. But we come by and we mark off the area so no one puts a beach umbrella down through the nest or disturbs it in any other way. And
you put a mesh over it as well?
We do. Yeah, we put a wire mesh over it because the coyotes and raccoons dig up the nests and eat the eggs. So
I quite often bump into your guys in the morning because I'm a photographer, getting up for sunrise.
Sure, perfect light.
So we quite often see each other, and we're sharing. We're the only ones sharing the beach, and I guess with the shallow shellers as well, but it's
they're out in the dark.
Shellers and you guys out at that time of the morning. Yeah, no, it's a fantastic job they do, and it's incredible to see when you do see. I've been fortunate enough to point out a few trails to your guys, just or ladies and gents.
It's a little treasure hunt.
Yeah, it is. It's great to see it when you know they've laid eggs and then gone away again. It's fantastic. And actually, I found a little bit of footage that I took when I was swimming in Belize of a turtle, which I might include in this, just because it was a really cool experience.
Yeah,
came up to me really close and. Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we're in this really rarefied place where we have endangered and threatened species. And here on Sanibel, we've had a very rare nesting of a leatherback sea turtle a few years back. Green sea turtles, which are an endangered species, we're seeing more and more of those nesting on Sanibel-Captiva. The loggerhead, which is the original species that Charles worked with. And then back in our bay, unknown to most people, is the rarest species in the world called a Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. And they spend some of their teenage years in Pine Island Sound.
Really?
Yeah.
And where do they nest?
The Kemp's Ridleys are the ones that people see these videos of massive nestings of hundreds of sea turtles all at once. That's the Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. That happens in Costa Rica. There's a coast in Mexico and a little bit in the Panhandle. And every once in a while, there'll be one on Sanibel.
And what draws them here? Do we know?
Not sure. I'd like to interview a sea turtle, so if you want to set up a podcast.
Let's do it. We're going to get one sitting right there. And then, so I wasn't aware of the different varieties of turtle that came here. So, and is that a new thing, or have they always been there? They just didn't know about it, or
the leatherback, I think, was the first time we've known of one nesting. The greens are increasing, and there's different field marks for how a loggerhead sea turtle crawls and how a green sea turtle crawls, and they're unmistakably different. And so our people who are on the endangered species permit know that and know to mark those in a different way and monitor in a different way. But we don't know if it's because the water temperatures are changing, the greens are nesting in a different place now than they used to, but by collecting that data year after year after year, you start to see trends.
Oh, maybe they just figured out you guys are here and it's a safe place to come, you know?
That's right. Come on down. The coyotes have taken care of the raccoons, so...
And another thing that's unique to Sanibel, not unique across the country, I'm sure, but there is an ordinance on the beaches where resorts can't have bright lights at night.
Right.
Yeah, so the lights are very much dimmed on the beach because they do navigate through moonlight. So
they navigate whether there's a full moon or not, but bright light on the beach will distract a sea turtle. Young sea turtle will go the wrong way and may get dehydrated if it loses its way to the water. So we ask people to be really respectful, even if they're out with flashlights or fishing at night. Be aware that there may be baby sea turtles trying to find the water.
So they're going to head to the light, or it's...
Yes, they will.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then, so on a similar vein, you've had some experience on the snake front.
I have. Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well,
the indigo snake.
Yeah. So one of the opportunities that's afforded this to my husband Red and I is that living on North Captiva, where there aren't highways or paved roads, just sandy paths for golf carts, you can actually see snake tracks crossing the road. And my husband's much better at being the snake wrangler than I am, and I never really cared for snakes. Most people don't. But an indigo snake is one of the most docile animals you could ever encounter, and they can get to be almost 8 feet long. They're the largest snake.
Wow. I didn't know that.
In the United States, native snake. And so I had casually taken a picture of an indigo snake crawling across a 4 by 8 feet sheet of plywood, and I showed it to our herpetologist, and he went crazy. And it turns out they've been looking for a place to do an indigo snake research project. And we did have indigo snakes here on this island. In fact, I named the Indigo Trail in the Ding Darling Refuge after the indigo snakes that used to sun there. But the last indigo snakes that we know of were in the 1990s. So they're gone from this island. But our herpetologists, discovering that they existed on North Captiva, started coming up and working with my husband and I and a couple other volunteers to tag them and put a little thing that looks like a piece of rice in them, so that if they're illegally taken from the wild and sold, we're able to track them, but also monitor their growth, how fast they grow, their reproduction, those sorts of things. We got a little worried the first couple of years we didn't find any females, and it was like, oh no little girls. And then we finally started catching some female indigo snakes, so we know there's a...
Have you got any estimations or guesstimates how many snakes are out there?
That's probably the worst question you can ask a biologist, is how many there are of anything.
Okay.
But they've tagged about 18 on North Captiva, and they keep looking on Cayo Costa. It's the perfect habitat there, and they haven't found any. But Pine Island is the other place where an indigo snake population has been found, and we've been monitoring over there as well. Unfortunately, most of the ones they find on Pine Island have been hit by cars.
So is that something that they would reintroduce back into the wild? Is that an intention, or is that a plan, or is there a reason they left? Were they overhunted, or?
The last indigo snake on Sanibel was struck by a bicycle, and the tragedy in trying to reintroduce indigo snakes to a place like Sanibel is that we have so many roads. Indigos do not like to be cold, and so our dark paved roads become a heat source after sunset in the wintertime, and the indigos would crawl out onto the road to get warm, and a car would come by, not recognize what it was, and they'd be struck by cars. So unless there's a way for indigos to be able to move across roads,
it's just not an ideal habitat.
No. And the barrier island indigo snakes have a unique genetic makeup. And so you can't take an indigo snake from the interior part of Florida and put them out on these islands, because it's not true to the species.
Gotcha. They're slightly different.
Correct.
Depending where they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the different types of things that you can do? I mean, obviously you've got the exhibition that's on Sandcap Road. Just run through the walks and the different activities that you offered for the public, as well as the scientific work you're doing. But
well, if you happen to be stuck in traffic on Periwinkle Way, never. But if the crowds kind of bother you, one of the great opportunities there are available on Sanibel is to come to our nature center, where we have 4 miles of walking trails. And generally, if you run into more than 4 or 5 other people on those 4 miles of trails, it's a busy day. So it's a nice, calm place to go and enjoy the out of doors without a lot of crowds around. So that's at 3333 Sandcap Road.
And that's called?
That's the SCCF Nature Center.
Okay.
And then the walking trail that's down at the Native Landscape and Garden Center is called the Shipley Trail. And it connects with a city park trail. So you can go from the Chamber of Commerce on the entrance to the island there at Lindgren, all the way to past the Bailey Homestead without ever crossing Periwinkle Way. It parallels Periwinkle.
Wow.
And that you can bicycle or walk.
And how far is that?
It's just about a mile.
Okay.
On those trails. You can make it a little longer by going around the ponds that are on the city property. But when we acquired the Bailey Homestead Preserve, we decided to connect those two trails and went through the permitting process to be able to build a boardwalk that goes over a wetland. Mm-hmm. And so now that becomes one contiguous public use area.
Wow. Wow, awesome. And then there's also which other places can the public go to?
Well, there's a trail on the Pick Preserve, which is opposite the Sanibel Elementary School. Well, Sanibel School, I should say. And that's primarily used by the school students rather than by the general public. There's a little trail off of Cassia Bell Road on the Bob Wigley Preserve, but it's sort of an in and out. It isn't a very long trail. But I think the other sort of hidden gem on the island is the Periwinkle Preserve, which is a green stretch of Periwinkle Way, more or less between Jerry's grocery store and Tahitian Gardens shopping area on the Gulf side. So that would be the left side of Periwinkle as you're headed up island. There's a little gazebo there, and we've planted that as a tropical hardwood hammock for songbird migration. And it's just a lovely little trail off the bike path. So sometimes bicyclists stumble into it by accident.
Luminary, you would stumble into
Luminary.
it?
Oh, Luminary, it's glowing quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I know
it's quite
it
a
from
place,
Luminary.
yes.
Okay, cool. And then tell us about the opening hours. So on the Sandcap Road, Sanibel-Captiva Road, on the left-hand side as you're going up towards Captiva.
Correct.
Then you've got your nature centre with the
Right.
walks, the boardwalks, and tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that. What is that?
So the Nature Center is 1 mile west of Tarpon Bay Road, and there are exhibits inside that talk about our marine research and about our habitat restoration work and our shorebird and sea turtle research. And behind the Nature Center is this network of 4 miles of trails. You can choose to walk a half mile or you can choose to walk all 4. But in the back area is an observation tower where you can climb and see the island the way the birds do, with no political boundaries between city lands and refuge lands and our lands, and kind of see it above the treetops. So it's a nice tucked away little quiet place. And as I said, and you have mentioned, our Native Landscape and Garden Center has been relocated now to Periwinkle Way. So it's a little bit different, but it's kind of a nice, quiet, off the beaten path kind of place.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely a good rainy day thing to do if you've got kids.
Oh,
Yeah, Laurie just said what are the hours and the price of the admission.
So the hours of operation for the Nature Center are 8:30 until 4 during the winter months and 8:30 to 3 during the summer months. We're not open on the weekends, and it's $5 per person unless you're 17 and under, and then it's free.
Oh, wow.
So
Perfect.
the little exhibit hall is best for those little, what I call the knee highs. When you get them at about 3 or 4 years old, up to about 7 years old, and they've got a lot of energy. There's a manatee, kind of look-alike manatee to climb on, and blocks and different things they can play with, and bones they can pick up, and those sorts of things.
You've got some live exhibits in there.
Yeah, we
You've got
do.
a couple
Some
of turtles and
diamondback terrapins, and snapping turtle and soft-shelled turtle and a couple other things. And we hope to put a couple of saltwater aquariums in there as well here in the near future.
Very cool, very cool. And the staff are very helpful there and very informative, and definitely if you've got any questions, they're happy to help.
And we've got great volunteers helping us there.
Yeah, so you can volunteer to help the SCCF?
Oh, absolutely. We have folks that answer the phones for us and kind of act as the first buffer on whether or not it's a Google salesperson or whether or not it's or someone who really wants help. And then we have people that act as hosts and hostesses at the Nature Center itself.
Perfect. And where can everybody find out about SCCF?
Oh, thank you. It's S as in Sam, C as in Carl, C as in Carl, F as in Frank, sccf.org.
.org. Okay, perfect. And that just explains everything about all the different places you can go at the times and everything.
We've just remodeled our website in the last 6 months, so we hope that people find at least most of what they're looking for, and if they don't, our phone number's there and our email addresses are there, and they can get a hold of us.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Just I put you on the spot here a little bit.
Okay.
Obviously, you're very involved with the SCCF, but what about, is there anywhere else you'd recommend, anything you'd recommend tourists to do while they're here that maybe they wouldn't necessarily know about, or what would be your favourite recommendations or things to do if you weren't at SCCF?
If I weren't at SCCF, well, I'm a person who wants to be on the water. So any way I can get out on the water or in the water is what I like to do. So I don't think you can experience an island without experiencing the water that's around it. And,
absolutely, 100%.
And to me, the bay, Pine Island Sound, is even a greater gem than the beaches. Just going out and being able to seine net through the seagrasses, or being out on the water and even watching fish dart around in the seagrasses is a wonderful thing. So for me and the kind of life that I live, being out on the water, but I generally don't go on weekends after 10 o'clock in the morning, because that's when all the weekend traffic takes over. And I want to have it a little bit more private experience.
Yeah. So you still boating? Are you still boating?
I still boat, but I don't boat to work every day.
There you go. You pick and choose when you go.
Yes, I do.
And actually, if you do go back in the Pine Island Sound, back over there, you will see several more of these.
Right. There's more fish houses up on your way to Yucatan Island. In fact, you can just see them ghosting
right. There's 4
here.
there. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. There's one that looks like a little red schoolhouse
and
out there.
I've got a picture of it right over there, but we can't see it.
Yeah,
that's
and these guys are cousins.
Oh, really?
Because they were fishing families together.
Okay. Were they actually ever inhabited, or they were just used for storage?
Well, the fish houses that are out on the oyster bar just off of Pineland Marina were actually houses.
Okay.
And there were dozens and dozens of these everywhere in Pine Island Sound and in the rest of South Florida. Pine Island mullet were known as one of the best tasting mullet around. And so the commercial fishing here was really active. And if it's interesting, you never waste anything when you're on an island. So these houses actually are designed so you can put pieces of wood underneath them and let the tide rise, and you can actually float the house off the pilings and relocate it in another place. Historically, that's what they did with these houses.
If it got too shallow, or
if the fishing was better someplace else, or one of the commercial fishermen wanted a house to be located someplace else, that's how they'd relocate them. Just float them up and move them out.
That's incredible. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. There is one thing that I'd like to ask you to do, that we ask all guests to do, because you are actually... have you ever seen one of these?
Oh, yes.
It's a queen conch shell, and you're from the islands, I take it, around the islands.
Yep.
So let's see, can you get a tune out of that?
I'm not going to get the flight of the bumblebees.
You're
out.
not?
No.
Let's try it together. Go on, here we go. So... Ready? 1, 2, 3. Awesome. That's fantastic. You've probably done better than anybody else that's been here.
lived in the Keys.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, guys.
No problem.
Have a great one. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Insider's Guide to the Islands. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.